Now we're recording. You would not think we've been doing this since before COVID.
Yeah.
We
Started this in 99, didn't we?
still
Not quite. If somebody could just let me know that they can see.
you just type in the chat if you can see the main screen with the slides.
So I'm hoping, yeah, you can see the main slides and everything looks good.
Yep, perfect.
Thanks, Mel and
Thank
Dave.
you.
Right.
And welcome, Croeso, to TPAS Cymru's fourth annual All Wales Tenant Survey on Tenant Perception. So this yearly survey and report really is aimed to capture those views, as it does every year, from tenants across Wales about their homes and about their communities and the issues that they believe matter to them the most. And as we are the leading tenant engagement organisation in Wales, we believe strongly that this report offers decision makers valuable insights into the real priorities of
Hmm.
tenants. So we've gathered responses from a wide range of audiences and a wide range of sectors, as we do every year with this specific survey, the All Wales survey. So it's the tenants from the social housing sector and the private rental sector across local authority housing and RSL housing. And the findings. Oh, and I'm Elizabeth. For those of you that don't know,
I'm
I'm
sure probably said
Elizabeth.
that at the beginning. I'm David
Yeah, and
Wilson.
this is
Most of
David
you know who
Wilson.
we are.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, great.
So I just want to say, firstly, before we go into this one, this is the fourth of this year. You might remember we started the year in January, February time, I think we published it around homelessness allocations. It was quite a useful piece on that. Energy efficiency, affordable warmth. It's one of the biggest subjects we've got, I think, for the next decade, and therefore it's important. And we were doing that one again in the spring. Rent and service charge affordability, that never goes away. And we're at a critical point at the moment with Welsh Government setting their next 5 year or potentially 10 year rent strategy, like England have. And I'm hoping we're going to look at it much more interestingly than just CPI +1 and things like that. That's what England did. So again, these pulse feed into that, and I've presented the results of the rent service charge and affordability into the Welsh Government working group on this. David Lloyd's chairing a session just now. And today we're here for the four All Wales annual report, which we'll go into now. And so just want to say it's on the website as it's going live at this very moment. You can either just see a short report, like an executive summary, two page or
Yeah,
so.
it's just two
Yeah.
pages.
Yeah. Or you can go into the full report and that'll take you into probably about 40 odd pages or so, won't it?
Yeah.
Um, but they're both on there. We'll also put the recording on there. So we've got one landing page that has it all on there. And the theme this time, I think very much when we looked at the results and analysis, was it's about housing that works, a tenant-driven approach to improvement. Tenants are saying very clear stuff to landlords, and therefore we need to make sure that voice is coming out on there.
So we set out the survey as just 21 questions this time. So we've managed to shorten it a little bit. It's still quite long with the demographic questions, which is something that we're continuously trying to improve. So open to any suggestions. We had over 600 responses. Again, this was less than we've had previously. On reflection, we've done this at the same time as some other surveys have been going out from landlords. Again, this is something that we're continuously working on and trying to improve. We have seen an increase this time in respondents aged 46 to 60 in both tenures, but particularly for those in the private rental sector over the age of 60, which was very interesting.
Mm.
As you can see on the charts on the screen, this is the breakdown of the sectors. So predominantly 54% were housing association tenants, 25.7% rented from private landlords, 17.5% from local authorities tenants, and then other with around supported housing.
Shared ownership, yeah,
Shared ownership, yeah. And as you can see from the age groups, we've had an increase this time in over 60s, as it was two surveys ago from our annual survey. But a lot of these are in the private rental sector for
Yeah.
for the over 60s. So again, the analysis has been broken down into the 4 different regions, so north, west, mid, southeast, and southwest, because the staff telling us that would help them to implement changes within their organisations using this pulse findings.
And I think that's really useful sometimes, just to, it's things we probably already suspect. Like if you're a young person in Powys, in Ceredigion, up in Gwynedd, get in the private rental sector, that's a tough place to be, to find something affordable in those areas when you're competing against a number of other factors like Airbnb and second homes and things like that. So whilst we know that, it's useful to see this in black and white in the analysis. We're not going to do too much on the PRS today. Most of your social housing, but in the report you'll see that type of stuff, and it's very useful for us to have conversations with Welsh Government about
And
it.
just a caveat, I guess we are the only people gathering this data in Wales from tenants from across Wales. So we really need to see more responses from, local authority tenants. There's so many tenants living still in local authority housing, and that is as you can see, our weakest response rate. And we really want to know what the challenges and what the successes are within there. So anyone here that's from local authority housing, please encourage that with it internally. So we ask responses every year. We ask for tenants to tell us their response to their main source of income was. We've seen some changes in responders compared to last year. We've seen a reduction in those with income from paid work, and this could be because of the increase in the over 60s. And we've seen an increase in those on universal credit and retirement income. So in 2023, 48% of those were earnings from work, income paid from work, and this year it's obviously 34, or just over 34%. So we have seen a reduction. Again, it could be due to the age, but it could also be due to people struggling with finding work.
So we're going to see, it depends on who fills it in. We've got a loyal base here, but we'll see fluctuations. And this time we saw, when we looked at diversity of different voices, some of them stay the same, like English is the second language, English is my, not my first language, things like that. But there was a noticeable increase this time in people who self-identified with LGBTQ, much higher up there. And the black and minority ethnic had come down slightly. It's not massive, but it's enough of a concern. There was always a strong PRS response for black and minority ethnic, and we didn't get as much of it this time. And that's something we're going to have to sit and reflect on. I think we're quite open and honest at TPAS as to look at what worked, what didn't, and that's an area we're going to need to look at. How we get that private rental sector voice up. So let's look at what are the key findings, because that's what you're here for.
Okay, so as with previous findings, affordability is a key concern from tenants across both sectors. 65% of tenants were concerned about affordability, which has gone up from last year, which was 58%. 49% of tenants are struggling to pay their bills. Again, this has risen from last year, from 40%. And 13% of tenants within the private sector say that universal credit is too low. So despite the increases in universal credit and in LHA rates, it's still an issue for people. It's gone up from 8% in 2023.
So I don't think it's just an affordability, it's that it doesn't give enough options to move, or you're effectively, if you're locked into that property, then
which is what we've seen throughout this, haven't we? So we'll go into that a little bit more.
So one of the things we ask people about is what do you want to hear from your landlords? What do you want to know? What do you want to be engaged with? What's important to you? And without a doubt, top of the league always is maintenance. When you're going to do maintenance work, when are these things like WHQS, when it's going to happen, being part of that conversation, knowing when work's going to be forward, even down to just repairs and stuff. If there's plans for replacing all the kitchens or the windows, when is that? And I know that's a really difficult one for landlords, but it is still by far the thing that tenants want to know most from.
And it may be that that's already being communicated by landlords, but it's perhaps the method of communication
it's not reaching people.
that's not reaching people.
Um,
Um,
the other thing also there is that 60% tenants saying they're experiencing damp and mold. That doesn't necessarily mean it reaches a definition of damp and mold. There's lots of, things like mildew and things like that will come in a lot of good properties, but there's still a perception. It's still high. So it's roughly in line with last year, and that's still a concern that we're still seeing that high damp and mold perception. And I think working on that together as tenants and landlords is a key one. And I think also here about rent. Rent comes up all the time, not just about affordability, but especially for social renters, social housing renters, it's about knowing how those decisions are made about rent setting. Where's the money going on? Who decides the levels of service charges and what service charges do I get for that? Again, transparency of that is key and comes up a lot.
Which is written in the recommendations, which we'll go through a little bit later.
And energy satisfaction, no big surprise. Energy prices went up around the time that this survey was going out, and I think people are expecting more from landlords, whether that's private rental sector or social, in making homes more energy efficient. It's much more in the news. They're aware of their bills, and they want to see results. I know there's a lot of planning going on with WHQS, but turning planning into reality is key for this.
Okay, so tenant engagement. This, as with every year, does vary across the sectors. People want different things from their landlords when they're in the private sector or in the social housing sector. We have seen an increase this year in tenant satisfaction. I believe, and I have not got the figure on me, but I believe it was 48% last year, and it's got up to 60% this year. So that's the people are obviously noticing the efforts that landlords are making with the level of engagement. However, younger tenants between the ages of 18 and 30, there was less satisfaction with them, with 46%. Social housing tenants are more engaged than PRS tenants. So as you can see, 87% of tenants in the social housing sector were asked for their opinion on things. Whereas less than 5% of tenants in the private rental sector were, which is expected.
Yeah, I mean,
but that has increased as well, the 87%. So that's gone up. So the question was, have you been asked for feedback from your landlord? And 87% had. So that's a really good figure. It really shows the improvement. However, just to note, there's still 40% of people that aren't satisfied with the overall engagement. So there's always room for improvement.
Yeah. So one of my favorite questions is about what would you change about your home? What's the one thing you would change? Now, we have got criticism from landlords before about, well, there's not much I can do about, can they actually change any of these things? But I think it's a really important question to get at the heart of what matters to tenants. And what matters, as you can see here, about your home, repairs and maintenance, better repairs and maintenance, energy efficiency. I think they're interlinked. More space, in terms of the property they've got, parking ASB and no issues, things like that. I think that's really important. Now, what can we do about it? Who knows? But we can discuss that. And the same with the changes to community. ASB comes up all the time. Public transport is really important, especially private rental sector. Public transport is key to them. It's number one by a mile, whereas ASB hardly features. ASB is a much more of an issue in social housing than in the private rental sector. And I think also about things like there's some things in there about community and how you view your community. And certainly private rental sector is a bit more positive about their community compared to social housing. And also people from Black minority ethnic were more positive about their community than the overall population pool here. So I think there's some issues here. There's always issues around energy efficiency, space, but yeah, antisocial behaviour is definitely still there and still a concern in social housing. And how do they feel about the current? We wanted to get people how they feel about their home. Is it where they want to be settled? Is it temporary? Would they like to be living somewhere else? And you can see here, this is the combined one. but you can see up there, 55% plan to stay in this home for a long time. Now, that might not be a surprise if people here in social housing, there is an element of, especially with adaptations, affordable security. Yeah, people do want to stay in there, but actually, that's going up year on year, and I think it's not driven by people who are saying, "Oh, I just really that's what I really want in life to stay in this home for a long time." We're seeing a huge decrease year on year on ambitions to buy. And I don't mean just the private rental sector. Yeah, that's crashing down. There's a lot of people in the private rental sector coming to the realization that they ain't going to be able to buy. That goal, that dream is just going further away with property prices, stagnant wages, things like that. But in social housing as well, it used to be much higher. It's down to 3% now.
It's not necessarily a bad thing.
No, but they certainly are seeing their current rental sector. Generation rent we talk about, there is increasingly more and more generations who are going to be renting for a long time.
Yeah.
And I think that's just a cultural and a societal change that we need to bear in mind. It isn't something people did until something else happened.
And a reality that social housing is so important. It couldn't be more important. People don't want to buy anymore. People want to stay living in rental properties, and whether that's down to affordability or security of tenure, or we don't know, do we?
No, and I think some of the middle bits there around size and different areas, you're always going to have a certain amount of people who would like to live somewhere else, or maybe a bigger property. We all put our hands up to that in terms of wanting more space and things like that. There's always an element of that, but certainly the longer term renting is something we're seeing increasingly year on year.
We tried to understand it a little bit more to find out why people answered it was the next one.
Oh, sorry.
Why people answered the questions the way that they did, so why they did want to stay there, why they didn't want to stay there. A lot of it was around financial constraints. Some of the people were feeling stuck in their current rental situation, unable to afford to move to a more suitable place, so into an area that was more desirable, perhaps. Renters felt that their every attempt to improve their current situation felt hindered by their financial limitations. So here are just a few of the quotes from tenants themselves. People were hoping to move to a bungalow, which we hear quite a lot from a flat.
I tell you, if I get a pound for every time I hear that, bungalows, people desperate for bungalows.
They're just not
year on year, people saying the same. We just don't build them anymore, do we?
No, do we not build them?
Okay, some landlords build some new ones, but ultimately on land now, it's easier to, or it's more effective to put a block of flats on it.
It'd be helpful though, wouldn't it?
Oh, I agree. And it's also, I think it's we've seen this before with the lack of bungalows and older people's accommodation. We're seeing a lot of empty nesters, people who are over occupying homes, their family homes that they raise their family in, still occupying them 3-4 bedders
with bedrooms
because they can't move into something more suitable. And that comes up a lot in other work that TPAS does. I'm not sure that is working, that supply at the moment. And there's people desperate for a 3-bedder, there's people in a 3-bedder desperate to get out of it. And I don't think we're getting that right as a sector.
Parking kept coming up as an issue with people, as they had to park so far away, and with disabilities struggle to get to where they need to be. And people trying to get out of their property, so they're trying to save up due to the rise in damp and mold.
Yeah.
And want to find want to find a cheaper rental, but it feels impossible now. And I think a lot of people are feeling that way, that everything's just unreachable now. Like they can't move property, they can't buy a property, they can't live in an area that is closer to the school that they might like, or closer to better parking.
And even within social housing, we have to move and swaps and things like that. It's getting harder and harder. Yeah. So, and I think that will affect society and how people feel if they're not confident about their areas. So, and that comes back to that satisfaction with homes and communities. If you read the full report, you'll see these fancy diagrams at the end, spider diagrams, that track all people's satisfaction about their home and their community and things like that. And there are some noticeable differences. Overall, 78% satisfied with their home, and that's pretty consistent across social and private rental sector.
It's a good figure.
Yeah, it is. It's good. So suitable in size. I don't think anyone would ever really say I've got the right size property. But there are some things here: antisocial behaviour, mentioned already, public transport. These are real core things that matter to people, and you see big differences then in as when you start the report segments on age and different factors. It's a real concern of people.
And there were some comments in there around people wanting to move into social housing but not being able to. So having that more affordable rents was so desirable for people, but just the the lack of social housing that's available to them, because then trying to move to somewhere else within the private rental sector was just impossible because it was just so expensive.
I mentioned already antisocial behaviour being an issue more in social housing. There are some surprising figures as well, though. So I think I've mentioned already, people from Black minority ethnic were actually much more positive about their community, which I think was a positive. Certainly, some of the private rental sector people were more positive about their community as well. So I think it very much there is commonality and differences that the report, the full report, pulls out.
Yeah. So recommendations. So basically turning all these insights that we found within this report from tenants into actions. So we've actually developed 6 clear and actionable recommendations for landlords to have come out of this report. Some things that were desirable for tenants are just completely impossible to develop a recommendation out of that would be able to be put into practice. So we've tried to ensure that everything that we've recommended can be put into practice. So in terms of improving affordability, so rents, Welsh Government have got their new rent policy on the horizon, and we really will be involved in that ourselves. We'll be doing some work around that, and we'll be probably setting up some workshops so that people can have their say. But we encourage tenants and landlords to ensure tenants to have their voices heard, and for landlords to ensure that that tenants have opportunities to have their voices heard in the consultation process. And because we know how impactful consultation can be, we think about the flooring work that we did and the flooring research that we worked with Tide Powerbomb, and how that's now become part of legislation. It's in the WHQS standards, and that's just how impactful tenant voice can be. So I just think it's so important for tenants to have their say, get involved in the consultation, and this report really highlights the need for tenants to be able to have their say. So using different mechanisms. Anyone that came to our conference, somebody made a recommendation for tenants to develop their own video, like one video that they get to send to Welsh Government. So anything that we can do to support that, but for landlords to just really engage with tenants within the new Welsh Government rent policy. Number 2, so enhancing repairs and maintenance. So really that's more about prioritising and repairs and addressing those damp and mold issues and energy efficiency. But by doing this, you can do this by developing transparent, actionable maintenance and improvement plans that can then be shared with tenants. They just want to know what is happening, and whether, if that is 5 years away, it is 5 years away, but they just want to know. That's what came out. Boosting tenant participation or tenant engagement. So connecting with those communities and being transparent. So we've seen that there's a need to increase that outreach work within the communities with younger people, with underrepresented groups. And this needs to be done really by understanding the unique concerns and the preferred methods of engagement. So landlords should create a transparent communications around rent, around service charges that really meet the needs of their tenant profile. So understanding the tenant profile in the first instance. Next, focusing on energy efficiency. So we know we've got looming WHQS deadlines for assessments. So communicating this with tenants, be open and honest about the challenges, and continue to educate tenants on the energy efficiency practices. I know so many of you are out there who are already educating tenants on things that they can do within their home to minimise their energy costs. So continuing to do that, and just also being open and transparent about WHQS and about the...
Yeah, we can help with that. So I'm doing a lot with a number of landlords now, helping them develop their communication plans, engagement groups as well that will do tracking of WHQS and accountability. But there's a lot we can do on that, and some really positive work happening at the moment across Wales.
And number 5, strengthening that community support. So landlords to address ASB through tenant-led initiatives and partnerships with local authorities. So communicating better with those impacted tenants. I know Eleanor does our comms and engagement.
Just a number of ASB events.
Yeah,
Eleanor
does lots of ASB events. So, you know, get involved in them and we can support you with anything like that. And tenants rely heavily on public transport. So this community support element, we queried this, didn't we? Because it's, you know, what can we do? You know, we can't just say, right, landlords to put some buses in place. It's not that simple. So we've recommended, since tenants rely so heavily on public transport and have been very clear throughout this report that it's something that they truly value and want to see improve within their communities, we just encourage that Welsh Government and local authorities continue to work on regional and public transport strategies.
And I think that's the point, is housing associations, local authority housing, your anchor organisations, you know. There is a chance to influence and shape decision makers by bringing that voice together. I know I've certainly written to Transport for Wales a number of times and ended up having a meeting at a closed train station about what would it take to reopen it and things like that. There is out there people who want to listen, and I think we, as organisations, as landlords and tenants working together, can do that, can help shape local policy. It's not as impossible as you think. Yeah.
And then finally, targeted support for diverse tenants. So it's about knowing your tenants and customizing the approach. So having that tenant profile, customizing housing support services for the aging population of tenants, LGBTQ, and addressing the affordability and housing security for BAME tenants and those who are reliant on universal credit and legacy benefits, understanding what those tenants need and then helping them.
And developing, I think, that communication can be done. I did some stuff with Caerphilly last week, for the council, on where do you get your news from? How do we reach people? And it was quite a fascinating session to look at where people find about news, where people find out what's happening in their community, where do they hear, how do they want to hear from their landlord, and things like that. And so
this goes on, doesn't it? You know, a lot of people who are on this call will already know about things that happen or might be doing those things themselves, getting out into the communities, finding out what people want. But there's still something missing because people are telling us there's still something missing. So it's about increasing that awareness of your tenant profile and those support services.
So that's it. We'll come on to some comments and questions now. Next steps. This is pretty much standard stuff. The people who completed the survey will have either received it yet or it's on its way. Who asked for a copy. We very much press it with Welsh Government, with members of the Senedd. We're in the Senedd tomorrow, meeting a number of key Senedd members. We'll be handing them a copy of this report and talking to them about it and talking them through it. If there's an opportunity you want us to speak at, we've done this with tenant groups and things like that before, do let us know. And anything else you think, any way you think we could get these messages out there, who we should be lobbying, let us know and we'll get on it.
I spoke at an RSL senior management team meeting a few weeks back, actually, because they were struggling to understand in their area. So we made sure that it was local. So we put that down specifically local to their community and gave them the results. And that's really helped them to shape their new initiatives for the next year. So if that is helpful to anybody, there's no additional charge. We'll do that as part of membership. And I
think David Lloyd's doing something with the board of a North Wales RSL soon. And again, he'll work some of this findings into that discussion with the board members. So
basically what we're saying is we're not here to say this is not being done, this is not being done. We're here to help you and to show you that these things can be improved, that some things are going well and just need to continuously improve, but we're here to help you with that.
Okay, so we'll come off the slides now, and we couldn't see the comments the last little bit, so let me just come off. Obviously, anyone wants the slides as well, then more than welcome as well. Let's just have a look at the chat. Is there anything?
So has anybody got any questions about the report?
or I want to say anything, I can hand you the microphone. I know this was set up as a webinar format instead of meeting in it, so it makes it a little less interactive. But if someone wants to speak, put the hand up, and we'll hand you the mic. Oh,
Can you get the slide sent over? Yeah,
yeah, we can do the slides as part of that. Vivian, I
Had to look for my unmute button. Can you hear me?
we can, yes, yeah.
Hi. I would just like to, you mentioned that you could talk to people and sort of raise queries. I do have some concern about the fact that local authorities have taken over the housing list from housing associations. They're not aware of the premises and the support where they're sending people who definitely need support. And they seem to be expecting elderly tenants to look after people because there's nobody here now. We don't have scheme managers.
Yeah.
We have someone who comes every 3 weeks. And I feel quite strongly that local authorities are not being considerate either to the people that they're housing or to the existing tenants.
Okay, I'll pick that one up, Vivian. I think it's an excellent observation, and it's not the first time I've heard this. I wrote a blog about it about 3 weeks ago, that the changing nature of things like sheltered schemes and things like that, and are we putting people in there? It got a real mixed response, which is what I wanted. There were people coming up to me going, saying things like, privately, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. We've got obsession with the housing allocations. We're going to get people off homelessness, out of B&Bs, and we're putting them wherever we can. And they were quite open about it, that it may not be the right place. There were some people who reacted quite badly to I had a bit of a discussion with a couple of people, and they were saying, well, there's vacancies in certain properties. We need to get people in there and get them off the street. That's a good thing. I do think that there is quite a serious conversation needs to happen about some schemes, sheltered schemes, things like that, and are we allocating people there that isn't in their best interest, or not in their and the impact it has, rising antisocial behaviour and things like that. So no, it's something, and I see Margaret, you're saying the same thing. It's something I'm raising with politicians tomorrow. I purposely printed off sections of that blog I wrote. We've reworked it into a clearer way for our Senate members to digest. And yeah, I think there's real anger out there and real concern. And I absolutely share with you, and I'm totally on this case.
No, and it's such a shame that, that is the perception, that they don't care. Like, that's the perception that's being given off, that they don't care. And and I feel like if we were to take this tomorrow and say that, that's going to maybe shake them up a little bit.
Yeah. Dave, you put the opposite is happening here. Is there anything, could you just mention what that is? I'll just give you a mic if you're assuming you're willing to speak.
Yeah, I'm willing.
So you put the opposite is happening here. Is that?
Yeah, well, we seem to have, we've got a common housing register here in Powys, and we don't seem to have any say. I mean, there's a lot of new RSLs building new properties here, but you never see any locals getting them, being offered them. So, and in the end, local authority have got a duty of care. They have no choice in the end, that they have to house people.
Yep.
We find that the RSLs are cherry picking.
And that's why there's still a lot of I think there's still a number of. I think there is a debate about allocations and how that works. There's two things. One is tenants seeing people just maybe who aren't allocated, who aren't suitable for that area. The second part of it has come up in that same blog, was tenants saying, why can't I bid for the new, shiny, new energy efficient homes? Instead of allocating it to people who've only just joined the housing register or something like that, and let them move into the property I've been in, and I think that's a lot of people are like, oh, it doesn't work like that, or it's not as simple, that's not how we do things. And I'm like, well, why not? Why not?
This was brought up at our tenant scrutiny panel,
Yeah.
You know, we're not getting a look in. We're paying for them to be built, but we're not getting a look in at them.
Yeah, and I think there's a very the example I gave of the last month is came from our tenant conference, and there was a tenant there by themselves. The husband had passed, the family had moved out, and she's rattling around a 3-bedroom, quite large property in the valleys, large gardens, everything. And she saw a 1-bed in a new development by her same landlord. Said, "Could I move into that 1-bed? You know, it looks lovely. And I could free up this whole large 3-bed." And they were like, "No, it's for new allocate, you know, people on the housing list only." And so she's over occupied. She doesn't use the upstairs. And yet somewhere else in Welsh, government's going, "We need more 3-bed large property, family properties." So I think there is an issue there. And I think that comes up in this, in the quotes, in the report. So I should be bringing it back to the report as Elizabeth. But I think we see that in there. And I think that's another part that isn't working well enough at the moment. That are we building the right properties to free up other properties and get that housing supply working better, where people are in the right property that is right for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jim, I don't want to put you on the spot here. I know if there's anything you want to jump in, please do put your hand up. We have a representative from the Welsh Local Government Association here, but it might be a bit unfair put them on the spot. Is there any other comments? I'm just going to
do a management.
Let's have a look in the comments. Yeah, Lynn, same problems here in Gwynedd. I don't think it's unique anywhere. I don't think any part of Wales has got this right, have they? You can do managed moves, yeah. I just don't know whether it's happening or not, or whether they want to.
Recently, haven't we, that there was managed moves, that what gets shared with the new tenant is not always the amount of information that they actually should have. So, you know.
Yeah, should we go off track on this one? Yeah, you would expect me to go off track on this. Sorry. We recently picked up on Reddit a tenant who had been flooded about 3 weeks ago. Big floods, flooded out. He'd only been there 7 months, and he put his heart and soul into that new property. It was his dream property. He'd done a lot of work on it in those 7 months, and the rain and the river came straight through, smashing through his downstairs. What also added to that devastation was when he talked to the neighbours afterwards, they were like, "Oh yeah, it was flooded 3 years ago." And he was like, "What?" And no one had told him that this property was susceptible to flooding, and he felt quite bitter that he should have been told that.
But he's had a transfer, hasn't he?
It was a transfer, yeah, and that wasn't part of it. Part of the information that gets shared in a transfer. As it happens, that landlord was very, very good about it. We've had a number of conversations with them, and they're changing their policy now to look at what is transparency, what should be told to a tenant when you're moving into a property. And that's something we're going to want to see rolled out across Wales, because I think you should know if you're moving into a property that's previously flooded, has previously had issues. And I think we tested it with some tenants last week, Thursday or Friday, and that came back very strongly. They suggested a 10-year limit on it. You can't go back to something flooded in the 70s or something. Parts of Cardiff flooded in the 70s, and they've had huge flood defences since then, you know. But certainly that transparency is something. It's not within this report, but it's
PPAS work.
Yeah.
Has anybody got any more questions before we finish up?
More than happy to pick up anything, or obviously
the report is going to be so after this session, when you go offline, you'll be sent the link. Everyone that's attended today will be sent the link to the webpage, and on the webpage we'll have the video recording, and it will have the slides, and it will have the reports.
The video takes a little bit, has to render first, so give me about an hour and a half or so. Just I can't physically do it any faster than that. It's a YouTube thing.
And then it'll be on.
But you will get an email later today with all the details on there. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if that's no more questions, then we'll
quiet group today. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time, everybody.